Good morning, it's Natasha N.K.O. It's the 13th of June, 0929. I'm going to start reading from one of my special books, my favourite book to reread because it's a collection of short, wonderful stories by Alan Bennett. It's called Talking Heads, winner of the 1989 Hawthornden Prize. We covered this at GCSE English in 1996. And I've reread it countless times since then. I'm not gonna read it in order, but the contents are: a chip in the sugar, bed among the lentils, a lady of letters, her big chance, soldiering on, a cream cracker under the settee. My two favourites are a chip in the sugar and bed among the lentils. I love them all, but those are my favourites. So I'm going to start with Bed Among the Lentils because I read Chip and the Sugar not too long ago. Let me introduce what he says. Introduction. These 6 monologues. Monologue is when it's a theatre production. Someone's on stage, but they're on stage by themselves, doing all the talking by themselves. These 6 monologues were written and recorded for BBC television in 1987. Right, so first one I'm reading is on page 30, Bed Among the Lentils. Susan is a vicar's wife. She is thin and nervous and probably smokes. She sits on an upright chair in the kitchen. It is evening. Geoffrey's bad enough, but I'm glad I wasn't married to Jesus. The lesson this morning was the business in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus prays and the disciples keep falling asleep. He wakes them up and says, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" It's my mother. I overslept this morning, flung on a cardigan and got there just as everybody was standing up. It was Holy Communion, so the militants were out in force. The sub-zero temperature in the side chapel doubtless adding to the attraction. Geoffrey kicks off by apologising for his failure to defrost the church. Subdued merriment. Mr. Medlicott has shingles, Geoffrey explains, and, as is well known, has consistently refused to initiate us lesser mortals into the mysteries of the boiler. Helpless laughter. Mrs. Belcher read the lesson. Mr. Belcher took the plate round. "Big day for you," I said to him afterwards. The sermon was about sex. I didn't actually nod off, though I have heard it before. Marriage gives the okay to sex is the gist of it, but while it is far from being the be-all and end-all, you can say that again, sex is nevertheless the supreme joy of the married state and a symbol of the relationship between us and God. So Geoffrey concludes, when we put our money in the plate, it is a symbol of everything in our lives we are offering to God, and that includes our sex. I could only find 10p. Thinking about the sermon during the hymn, I felt a pang of sympathy for the deity, gifted with all this sex. No fun being made a present of the rare and desiccated conjugations that take place between Geoffrey and me, or the frightful collisions that presumably still occur between the Belchers. Not to mention whatever shamefaced fumblings go on between Miss Budd and Miss Bantock. It's all right if we offer it to God, Alice. Well, if you say so, Pauline. Amazing scenes at the church door. Geoffrey had announced that after Easter, the bishop would be paying us a visit, so the fan club were running around in small circles. Miss Frobisher even going so far as to squeeze my elbow. Meanwhile, Geoffrey stands there, the wind billowing out his surplice and ruffling his hair. What who's who in the Diocese of Ripon calls his schoolboy good looks. I helped put away the books while he did his "underneath this cassock, I am but a man like anybody else" act. Such a live wire, said Mrs. Belcher, really putting the parish on the map. That's right, Burbles, Miss Shrubshaw, looking at me. We must cherish him. We came back and I cherished him with some chicken wings and a tuna fish sauce. He said, "That went down well." I said, "The chicken wings?" He said, "My sermon." I felt it hit the nail on the head. He put his hand over mine, hoping, I suppose, that having hit one nail, he might hit another. But I said I had to go round with a parish magazine. Good girl, he said. I can attack my paperwork instead. Roads busy, Sunday afternoon, families having a run out, wheeling the pram, walking the dog, living. Almighty God, unto whom all hearts be open, and from whom no secrets are hid, cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy glorious name, and not spend our Sunday afternoons parked in a lay-by on the ring road wondering what happened to our life. When I got back, Jeffrey was just off to Evensong. Was I going to come? When I said no, he said, really? Then I'd better pretend you have a headache. Why? One of the unsolved mysteries of life, or the unsolved mysteries of my life, is why the vicar's wife is expected to go to church at all. A barrister's wife doesn't have to go to court. An actor's wife isn't at every performance. So why have I always got to be on parade? Not to mention the larger question of whether one believes in God in the first place. It's assumed that being a vicar's wife, one does, but the question has never actually come up. Not with Jeffrey, anyway. I can understand why, of course. To look at me, the hair, the flat chest, the wan smile, you'd think I was just cut out for God, and maybe I am. I'd just like to have been asked, that's all. Not that it matters, of course. So long as you can run a tight jumble sale, you can believe in what you like. It could be that Jeffrey doesn't believe in God either. I've always longed to ask him, only God never seems to crop up. Jeffrey, I'd say, yes, Susan, do you really believe in God? I mean, cards on tables. Jeffrey, I'd say, yes, Susan, do you really believe in God? I mean, cards on tables. You don't honestly, do you? God's just like a job, like any other. You've got to bring home the bacon somehow. But no, not a word. The subject's never discussed. After he'd gone, I discovered we were out of sherry, so I've just been round to the off-licence. The woman served me, didn't smile. I can't think why. I spend enough. Go to black. Come up on Susan on the steps of the side chapel, polishing a candlestick. Afternoon. We were discussing the ordination of women. The bishop asked me what I thought. Should women take the services? So long as it doesn't have to be me, I wanted to say. They could be taken by a trained gorilla. Oh yes, Geoffrey chips in. Susan's all in favour. She's keener than I am, aren't you, darling? More sprouts, anybody? I said. On the young side for a bishop, but he's been a prominent sportsman at university, so that would explain it. Boxing or rugby. Broken nose at some stage, anyway. One of the Christianity's Common Sense Brigade. Hobbies, bricklaying apparently, and refers to me throughout as Mrs. Vicar. Wants beer with his lunch, and Geoffrey says he'll join him, so this leaves me with the wine. Geoffrey's all over him because the rumour is he's shopping round for a new archdeacon. Asks Jeff how outgoing I am. Actually says that. How outgoing is Mrs. Vicar? Mr. Vicar jumps in with a quick rundown of my accomplishments and an outline of my punishing schedule. Please. Asks Jeff how outgoing I am. Actually says that. How outgoing is Mrs. Vicar? Mr. Vicar jumps in with a quick rundown of my accomplishments and an outline of my punishing schedule. On a typical day, apparently, I kick off by changing the wheel on the Fiesta, then hasten to the bedside of a dying pensioner, after which, having done the altar flowers and dispensed warmth and appreciation to sundry parishioners en route, I top off a thrill-packed morning by taking round Meals on Wheels. Somehow. And this, to me, is the miracle, says Geoffrey. Somehow, managing to rustle up a delicious lunch in the interim. The miracle somewhat belied by the flabby lasagna we were currently embarked on. The ladies, says the bishop, where would we be without them? Disaster strikes as I'm doling out the tinned peaches. The jug into which I've decanted the carnation milk gets knocked over, possibly by me. Geoffrey, for whom turning the other cheek is part of his job, claims it caught his elbow, and his lordship takes the same line, insisting he gets doused in carnation milk practically every day of his life. Still, when I get a dishcloth and sponge off his gaiters, I catch him giving me a funny look. It's Mary Magdalene and a Nivea cream all over again. After lunch, Geoffrey's supposed to be taking him on a tour of the parish, but while we're having a cup of instant, he claps his hand to his temple because he suddenly remembered he's supposed to be in N.K.O blessing a steam engine. We're stacking the dishwasher and I asked Geoffrey how he thinks it's gone. Doesn't know. Fingers crossed, I say. I think there are more constructive things we could do than that, he says crisply, and goes off to mend his inner tube. I sit by the Aga for a bit, and as I doze off, it comes to me that by constructive things, he perhaps means prayer. When I wake up, there's a note from Jeffrey. Gone to talk to the ladies' bright hour. Go to bed. I'm not sleepy, and anyway, we're running low on sherry, so I drive into Leeds. I've stopped going round the corner now, as I owe them a bit on the side, and she's always so surly. There's a little Indian shop behind the infirmary I've found. It's a newsagent's basically, but it sells drink and anything really, the way they do. Open last thing at night, Sundays included. My ideal. Ramesh, he's called. Mr. Ramesh, I call him, though Ramesh may be his Christian name. Only not Christian, of course. I've been once or twice now, only this time he sits me in the back place on a sack of something and talks. Little statuette of a god on the wall. A god, not the god, not the definite article, one of several thousand apparently. Safety in numbers, I said, but he didn't understand. Looks a bit more fun than Jesus anyway. Shows me pictures of other gods, getting up to all sorts. I said, she looks a very busy lady. Is that yoga? He said, well, it helps. He's quite athletic himself. Apparently married, but his wife's only about 14, so they won't let her in. He said, well, it helps. He's quite athletic himself, apparently married, but his wife's only about 14, so they won't let her in. He calls me Mrs. Vicar too, only it's different. He has lovely teeth. Go to black. Come up on Susan in the kitchen near the Aga. Morning. Once upon a time, I had my life planned out, or half of it at any rate. I wasn't clear about the first part, but at the stroke of 50, I was all set to turn into a wonderful woman, the wife to a doctor or a vicar's wife, chairman of the parish council, a pillar of the WI, a wise, witty and ultimately white-haired old lady who's always stood on her own feet until one day, at the age of 80, she comes out of the county library, falls under the weight of her improving books, breaks her hip and dies peacefully, continentally and without fuss under a snowy coverlet in the cottage hospital. And coming away from her funeral in a country churchyard on a bright winter's afternoon, people would say, well, she was a wonderful woman. Had this been a serious ambition, I should have seen to it I was equipped with the skills necessary to its achievement. How to produce jam which, after reaching a good rolling boil, successfully coats the spoon. How to whip up a victorious sponge that just gives to the fingertips. How to plan, execute and carry through a successful garden fete. All weapons in the armoury of any upstanding Anglican lady. But I can do none of these things. I'm even a fool at the flower arrangement. I ought to have a PhD in the subject, the number of classes I've been to, but still my efforts show as much evidence of art as walking sticks in an umbrella stand. Actually, it's temperament. I don't have it. If you think squash is a competitive activity, try flower arrangement. On this particular morning, the rota has Miss Frobisher and Miss Belcher down for the side aisles, and I'm paired with Miss Shrubsole to do the altar and the lectern. My honest opinion, never voiced, needless to say, is that if they were really sincere about religion, they'd forget flower arrangement altogether, invest in some permanent plastic jobs, and put the money towards the current most popular famine. However, around mid-morning, I wander over to the church with a few dog-eared chrysanthemums. They look as if they could do with an immediate drink, so I call in at the vestry and root out a vase or two from the cupboard where Geoffrey keeps the communion wine. It not looming very large on my horizon, I assume I am doing the altar and Miss Shrubsole the lectern, but when I come out of the vestry, Mrs. S. is doing the altar. She said, no, I think Mrs. Belcher will bear me out. I'm down to do the altar. You are doing the lectern. Why? She smiled sweetly. Do you have a preference? The only preference I have is to shove my chrysanthemums up her nose, but instead I practice a bit of Christian forbearance and go stick them in a vase by the lectern. In the best tradition of my floral arrangements, they look like the poles of a wigwam, so I go and see if I can cadge a bit of backing for Mrs. Belcher. Are you using this? I say, picking up a bit of mouldy old fern. I certainly am. I need every bit of my inspirator. It gives it body. I go over and see if Miss Frobisher has any greenery going begging, only she's doing some Japanese number, a vase like a test tube half filled with gravel, in which she's throttling a lone carnation. So I retire to the vestry for a bit to calm my shattered nerves, and when I come out ready to tackle my chrysanthemums again, Mrs. Shrubshaw has apparently finished and fetched the other two up to the altar to admire her handiwork. So I wander up and take a look. Well, it's a brown job. Beech leaves, teasels, grass, that school of thought. Mrs. Shrubsole is saying, it's called Forest Murmurs. It's what I did for my highly commended at Harrogate last year. What do you think? Gert and Daisy are, of course, speechless with admiration, but when I tentatively suggest it might look a bit better if she cleared up all the bits and pieces lying around, she said, what bits and pieces? I said, all these acorns and fir cones and whatnot. What's this conquering of? She said, leave that. The whole arrangement pivots on that. I said, pivots? When the adjudicator was commenting on my arrangement, he particularly singled out the hint I gave of the forest floor. I said, Mrs. Shrubsole, this is the altar of St. Michael and all angels. It is not the wind in the willows. Mrs. Belcher said, I think you ought to sit down. I said, I do not want to sit down. I said, it's all very well to transform the altar into something out of Bambi, but do not forget that for the vicar the altar is his working surface. Furthermore, I added, should the vicar sink to his knees in prayer, which since this is the altar he is wont to do, he is quite likely to get one of those teasel things in his eye. This is not a flower arrangement, it is a booby trap. A health hazard, in fact. I say in a moment of supreme inspiration, it should be laselled has floor. Permit me to demonstrate. And I begin getting down on my knees just to prove how lethal her bloody forest murmurs is. Only I must have slipped, because next thing I know, I'm rolling down the altar steps and end up banging my head on the communion rail. Mrs. Shrubsole, who along with every other organisation known to man has been in the St. John's Ambulance Brigade, wants me left lying down, whereas Mrs. Belcher is all for getting me onto a chair. Leave them lying down, says Mrs. Belcher, and they inhale their own vomit. It happens all the time, Veronica. Only Muriel, says Mrs. Shrubsole, when they have vomited. Only Muriel, says Mrs. Shrubsole, when they have vomited. She hasn't vomited. No, I say, but I will if I have to listen to any more of this drivel, and begin to get up. Is that blood, Veronica? Says Mrs. Belcher, pointing to my head. Well, says Mrs. Shrubsole, reluctant to concede to Mrs. B on any matter remotely touching medicine, it could be, I suppose. What we need is some hot sweet tea. I thought that theory had been discredited, says Mrs. Belcher. Discredited or not, it sends Miss Frobisher streaking off to find a tea bag, and also it subsequently transpires to telephone all and sundry in an effort to locate Geoffrey. He is in York, taking part in a usual interdenominational conference on the role of the church in a hitherto uncolonised department of life, underfloor central heating, possibly. He comes herring back, thinking I'm at death's door, and finding I'm not, has nothing more constructive to offer than I take a nap. This gives the fan club the green light to invade the vicarage, making endless tea, and the vicar his lunch, and as he puts it, spoiling him rotten. Since this also licenses them to conduct a fact-finding survey of all the housekeeping arrangements, or absence of same. Where does she keep the derogate, vicar? A good time is had by all. Meanwhile, Emily Bronte is laid out on the sofa in a light doze. I come round to hear Geoffrey saying, Mrs. Shrubsole's going now, darling. I don't get up. I never even open my eyes. I just wave and say, goodbye, Mrs. Shrubsole. Only thinking about it as I drift off again, I think I may have said, goodbye, Mrs. Subsoil. Anyway, I meant the other, Shrubsoil. When I woke up, it was dark and Geoffrey'd gone out. I couldn't find a thing in the cupboard, so I got the car out and drove into Leeds. I sat in the shop for a bit, not saying much. Then I felt a bit wanny, and Mr. Ramesh let me go into the back place to lie down. I must have dozed off, because when I woke up, Mr. Ramesh has come in and started taking off his clothes. I said, what are you doing? What about the shop? He said, do not worry about the shop. I have closed the shop. I said, it's only 9. You don't close till 11. I do tonight, he said. I said, what's tonight? He said, A chance in a million. A turn up for the books. Will you take your clothes off, please? And I did. Go to black. Come up on Susan, sitting in the vestry having a cigarette. Afternoon. You never see pictures of Jesus smiling, do you? Come up on Susan, sitting in the vestry having a cigarette. Afternoon. You never see pictures of Jesus smiling, do you? I mentioned this to Geoffrey once. Good point, Susan, is what he said, which made me wish I'd not brought it up in the first place. Said I should think of our Lord as having an inward smile. The doctrine, according to Geoffrey, being that Jesus was made man, so he smiled, laughed, and did everything else just like the rest of us. Do you think he ever smirked? I asked, whereupon Geoffrey suddenly remembered he was burying somebody in 5 minutes and took himself off. If Jesus is all man, I just wish they'd put a bit more of it into the illustrations. I was sitting in church yesterday, wrestling with this point of theology, when it occurred to me that something seemed to have happened to Geoffrey. The service should have kicked off ages ago, but he's still in the vestry. Mr. Bland is filling in with something uplifting on the organ, and Miss Frobisher, never one to let an opportunity slip, has slumped to her knees for a spot of unscheduled silent prayer. Mrs. Shrubsole is lost in contemplation of the altar, still adorned with forest murmurs, a trail of ivy round the cross, the final inspired touch. Mr. Bland now ups the volume, but still no sign of Jeff. Arnold, says Mrs. Belcher, there seems to be some hiatus in the proceedings, and suddenly the fan club is on red alert. She's just levering him to his feet when I get in first and nip in there to investigate. His reverence is there, white-faced, every cupboard open and practically in tears. He said, "Have you seen it?" I said, "What?" He said, "The wine, the communion wine. It's gone." I said, "That's no tragedy," and offered to pop out and get some ordinary. Geoffrey said, "They're not open. Besides, what does it look like?" I said, "Well, it looks like we've run out of communion wine." He said, "We haven't run out. There was a full bottle here on Friday. Somebody has drunk it." It's on the tip of my tongue to say that if Jesus is all he's cracked up to be, why doesn't he use tap water and put it to the test when I suddenly remember that Mr. Bland keeps a bottle of cough mixture in his cupboard in case any of the choir boys get chesty? At the thought of celebrating the Lord's Supper in Benilyn, Geoffrey now has a complete nervous breakdown, but as I point out, it's red and sweet and nobody's going to notice. Nor do they. I see Mr. Belcher licking his lips a bit thoughtfully as he walks back down the aisle, but that's all. "What was the delay?" asks Mrs. Shrubsole. "Nothing," I said, "just a little hiccup." Having got it right for once, I'm feeling quite pleased with myself. But Geoffrey obviously isn't, and never speaks all afternoon, so I bunk off evensong and go into Leeds. Mr. Ramesh has evidently been expecting me because there's a bed made up in the storeroom upstairs. I go up first and get in. When I'm in bed, I can put my hand out and feel the lentils running through my fingers. When it comes up, he's put on his proper clothes, long white shirt, sash and whatnot, loincloth underneath, all spotless, like Jesus, only not. I watch him undress and think about them all at evensong, and Geoffrey praying in that pausey way he does, giving you time to mean each phrase, and the fan club lapping it up, thinking they love God when they just love Geoffrey. Lighten our darkness, we beseech thee, O Lord, and by thy great mercy defend us from all perils and dangers of this night. Like Mr. Ramesh, who is 26 with lovely legs, who goes swimming every morning at Merrion Street Baths and plays hockey for Horsforth. I ask him if they offer their sex to God. He isn't very interested in the point, but with them, so far as I can gather, sex is all part of God anyway. I can see why, too. It's the first time I really understand what all the fuss is about. They're among the lentils on the second Sunday after Trinity. I've just popped into the vestry. He's put a lock on the cupboard door. Go to black. Come up on Susan sitting in the drawing room of the vicarage. Much smarter than in previous scenes, she has had her hair done and seems a different woman. Evening. I stand up and say, "My name is Susan. I am a vicar's wife and I am an alcoholic." Then I tell my story, or some of it anyway. Don't pull any punches, says Clem, my counsellor. Nobody's going to be shocked. Believe me, love, we've all been there. But I don't tell them about Mr. Ramesh because they've not been there. Listen, people, I was so drunk. I used to go and sleep with an Asian grocer. Yes, and you wouldn't believe this. I loved it. Loved every minute. Dear, oh dear, this was a real drunken lady. So I draw a veil over Mr. Ramesh, who once, on the feast of St. Simon and St. Jude, choral evensong at 6, daily services at the customary hour, put makeup on his eyes and bells on his ankles, and naked, except for his little belt, danced in the back room of the shop with a tambourine. So how did you come to AA, they ask. My husband, I say, the vicar. He persuaded me. But I lie. It was not my husband. It was Mr. Ramesh, the exquisitely delicate and polite Mr. Ramesh, who one Sunday night turned his troubled face towards me with its struggling moustache and asked if he might take the bull by the horns and inquire if intoxication was a prerequisite for sexual intercourse, or whether it was only when I was going to bed with him. The beautiful Mr. Ramesh, 26, with wonderful legs, whether it was only with him I had to be inebriated. And was it? Asked this slim, flawless and troubled creature. Was it perhaps his colour? Because if not, he would like to float the suggestion that sober might be even nicer. So the credit for the road to Damascus goes to Mr. Ramesh, whose first name turns out also to be Ramesh. Ramesh, a member of the Community Council and the Leeds Federation of Trade. But none of this I say. In fact, I never say anything at all. Only when it becomes plain to Geoffrey, and it takes all of 3 weeks, that Mrs. Vicar is finally on the wagon. Who is it gets the credit? Not one of Mr. Ramesh's jolly little gods, busy doing everything under the sun to one another, much like Mr. Ramesh. Oh no, it's full marks to Geoffrey's chum, the deity, moving in his well-known mysterious way. So now everything has changed. From the moment I am a new woman and Geoffrey is a new man, and he brings it up on the slightest pretext. My wife's an alcoholic, you know. Yes, it's a great challenge to me and to the parish as an extended family. From being a fly in the ointment, I find myself transformed into a feather in his cap. Included it in his sermon on prayers answered when he reveals that he and the fan club have been having these jolly get-togethers in which they'd all prayed over what he calls my problem. It practically sent me racing back to the N.K.O Pepe even to think of it. The fans, of course, never dreaming that their prayers would be answered, are furious. They think it's brought us closer together. Geoffrey thinks that too. We were at some doleful diocesan jamboree last week, and I'm stuck there, clutching my grapefruit juice as Geoffrey's telling the tale to some bearded cleric. Suddenly he seizes my hand. We met it with love, he cries, as if love was some all-purpose antibiotic, which to Geoffrey it probably is. And it goes on, the mileage in it endless. I said to Geoffrey that when I stood up at AA, I sometimes told the story about the flower arranging. Result. He starts telling it all over the diocese. The first time was at conference on a supported parish. Gales of deep, liberated, caring laughter. He's now given it a new twist and tells the story as if he's talking about a parishioner. Then at the end he says, "Friends, I want to tell you something." Deep hush. That drunken flower arranger was my wife. Silence. Then the applause. Terrific. I've caught the other young, upwardly mobile parsons sneaking looks at me now and then, and you can see them thinking, why weren't they smart enough to marry an alcoholic, or better still a drug addict? Problem wives whom they could do a nice redemption job on, right there on their own doorstep, because there's no stopping Geoffrey now. He grips my hand in public, nay, brandishes it. We're a team, he cries, looks certain to be rural dean, and that's only the beginning. As the bishop says, just the kind of man we're looking for on the bench. Someone with a seasoned compassion, someone who's looked life in the face, someone who's been there. Mr. Ramesh sold his shop. He's gone back to India to fetch his wife. She's old enough now, apparently. I went down there on Sunday. There was a boy writing under new management on the window. Spelled wrong, and something underneath in Hindi, spelled right probably. He said he thought Mr. Ramesh would be getting another shop, only in Preston. They do that, of course, Asians. Build something up, get it going nicely, then take the profit and move on. It's a good thing. We ought to be more like that, more enterprising. My group meets twice a week and I go, religiously, and that's what it is, of course. The names are different, Frankie and Steve, Susie and Clem, but it's actually Miss Frobisher and Mrs. Shrubsole all over again. I never liked going to one church, so I end up going to two. Jeffrey would call that the wonderful mystery of God. I call it bad taste, and I wouldn't do it to a dog. But that's the thing, nobody ever says about God. He has no taste at all. Fade out. Thanks for listening. I think that might have been about half hour. Yeah, thanks for listening.